Early in the 18th century, the attention of Europe was directed to a very remarkable instance of fanaticism, which has been claimed by the animal magnetists as a proof of their science. For a period of 60 or 70 years, magnetism was almost wholly confined to Germany. Men of sense and learning devoted their attention to the properties of the magnet. One Father Hell, a Jesuit, and professor of astronomy at the University of Vienna, rendered himself famous by his magnetic cures. Hell invented steel plates of a peculiar form, which he applied to the naked body as a cure for several diseases. He communicated his system to Antoine Mesmer. The latter improved upon the ideas of Father Hell, constructed a new theory of his own, and became the founder of animal magnetism. Mesmer was born in May 1734 in Swabia, and studied medicine at the University of Vienna. He took his degrees in 1766, and chose the influence of the planets on the human body as the subject of his inaugural dissertation. Even at this early period, some faint ideas of his great theory were germinating in his mind. He maintained in his dissertation that the Sun, Moon, and fixed stars mutually affect each other in their orbits, that they cause and direct in our Earth a flux and reflux and affect in all organized bodies through the medium of a subtle and mobile fluid, which pervades the universe, and associates all things together in mutual intercourse and harmony. One of his patients was a young lady, named Esterline, who suffered under a convulsive malady. Her attacks were periodical, and attended by a rush of blood to the head, followed by delirium and syncope. These symptoms he soon succeeded in reducing under his system of planetary influence, and imagined he could foretell the periods of accession and remission. Having thus accounted satisfactorily to himself for the origin of the disease, the idea struck him that he could operate a certain cure if he could ascertain what he had long believed, that there existed between the bodies which compose our globe an action equally reciprocal and similar to that of the heavenly bodies. He soon convinced himself that this action did exist, and he found afterwards that he could produce the effects merely by passing his hands downwards towards the feet of the patient, even when at a considerable distance. This completed the theory of Mesmer. He wrote an account of his discovery to all the learned societies of Europe, soliciting their investigation. The Academy of Sciences at Berlin was the only one that answered him, and their answer was anything but favorable to his system or flattering to himself. Mesmer did not long find his residence at Vienna as agreeable as he wished. His pretensions were looked upon with contempt or indifference, and the case of Mademoiselle Esterline brought him less fame than notoriety. He determined to change his sphere of action, and travelled into Swabia and Switzerland. In the latter country he met with the celebrated Father Gassner, who amused himself by casting out devils, and healing the sick by merely laying hands upon them. At his approach, delicate girls fell into convulsions, and hypochondriacs fancied themselves cured. Mesmer at once acknowledged the efficacy of his cures, and declared that they were the obvious result of his own newly discovered power of magnetism. He then tried his hand upon some paupers in the hospitals of Bern and Zurich, and succeeded, according to his own account, but no other persons, in curing an ophthalmic disorder and a hernia. With memorials of these achievements he returned to Vienna, in the hope of silencing his enemies, or at least forcing them to respect his newly acquired reputation, and to examine his system more attentively. His second appearance in that capital was not more auspicious than the first. He undertook to cure a Mademoiselle Paradis, who was quite blind, and subject to convulsions. He magnetized her several times, and then declared that she was cured. At least, if she was not, it was her fault and not his. An eminent oculist of that day went to visit her, and declared that she was as blind as ever. Her family said she was as much subject to convulsions as before. Mesmer persisted that she was cured. The consequences of this pretended cure taught Mesmer that Vienna was not the sphere for him. Paris, the idle, the debauched, the pleasure-hunting, the novelty-loving, was the scene for a philosopher like him, and thither he repaired accordingly. He arrived at Paris in 1778, and began modestly by making himself and his theory known to the principal physicians. He hired a sumptuous apartment, which he opened to all comers who chose to make trial of the new power of nature. Women were quite enthusiastic about it, and their admiring tattle wafted its fame through every grade of society. Mesmer was the rage. From that time, animal magnetism, or, as some called it, mesmerism, became the fashion in Paris. The following was the mode of operation. In the center of the salon was placed an oval vessel, about 4 feet in its longest diameter, and 1 foot deep. In this were laid a number of wine bottles, filled with magnetized water with their necks outwards. Water was then poured into the vessel so as just to cover the bottles, and filings of iron were thrown in occasionally to heighten the magnetic effect. The vessel was then covered with an iron cover, pierced through with many holes, and was called the baquet. From each hole issued a long movable rod of iron, which the patients were to apply to such parts of their bodies as were afflicted. Around this baquet the patients were directed to sit, holding each other by the hand, and pressing their knees together as closely as possible, to facilitate the passage of the magnetic fluid from one to the other. Then came in the assistant magnetizers, generally strong, handsome young men, to pour into the patient from their fingertips fresh streams of the wondrous fluid. They embraced the patient between the knees, rubbed them gently down the spine and the course of the nerves, using gentle pressure upon the breasts of the ladies, and staring them out of countenance to magnetize them by the eye. Gradually the cheeks of the ladies began to glow, their imaginations to become inflamed, and off they went, one after the other, in convulsive fits. Some of them sobbed and tore their hair, others laughed till the tears ran from their eyes, while others shrieked and screamed and yelled till they became insensible altogether. This was the crisis of the delirium. In the midst of it, the chief actor made his appearance, waving his wand, like Prospero, to work new wonders. Dressed in a long robe of lilac-colored silk richly embroidered with gold flowers, bearing in his hand a white magnetic rod, and with a look of dignity, he marched with solemn strides into the room. He awed the still sensible by his eye, and the violence of their symptoms diminished. He stroked the insensible with his hands upon the eyebrows and down the spine, traced figures upon their breast and abdomen with his long white wand, and they were restored to consciousness. His adversaries denied the discovery, some calling him a quack, others a fool. His friends were as extravagant in their praise, as his foes were in their censure. Mesmer challenged an examination of his doctrine by the faculty of medicine. He proposed to select 24 patients, 12 of whom he would treat magnetically, leaving the other 12 to be treated by the faculty according to the old and approved methods. He also stipulated that the object of the inquiry should be not how these effects were produced, but whether they were really efficacious in the cure of any disease. The faculty objected to limit the inquiry in this manner, and the proposition fell to the ground. The government at last offered him a pension of 20,000 francs, and the cross of the Order of St. Michael, if he had made any discovery in medicine, and would communicate it to physicians nominated by the king. The latter part of the proposition was not agreeable to Mesmer. He feared the unfavorable report of the king's physicians, and, breaking off the negotiation, spoke of his disregard of money, and his wish to have his discovery at once recognized by the government. A royal commission of the Faculty of Medicine was appointed on the 12th of March 1784, to investigate the phenomena. Mesmer was formally invited to appear before this body, but absented himself from day to day, upon one pretense or another. At last the commissioners published their report, detailing the results. They came to the conclusion that the only proof advanced in support of animal magnetism was the effects it produced on the human body. Those effects could be produced without passes or other magnetic manipulations. All these manipulations produce any effect at all if employed without the patient's knowledge. Therefore imagination did, and animal magnetism did not, account for the phenomena. This report was the ruin of Mesmer's reputation in France. He quitted Paris shortly after, with the 340,000 francs which had been subscribed by his admirers, and retired to his own country, where he died in 1815, at the advanced age of 81. But the seeds he had sown were nourished and brought to maturity by the kindly warmth of popular credulity.